I didn't tell my parents that my grandfather had left me $40 million. Looking back now, that silence was the smartest decision I have ever made. 3 days after we buried him, I unlocked an old steel box exactly as he'd instructed. Inside wasn't just proof that my family had lied to me for decades. There were letters, bank records, and a confession so devastating that I had to read the first page 3 times before I believed it. Everything I thought I knew about my childhood, my parents, even why they always treated my older brother like he mattered more than I did, was a carefully built lie. If I had told them about the inheritance that first day, every dollar would have disappeared before sunrise. Instead, I stayed quiet. And because I stayed quiet, I lived long enough to uncover the truth that my grandfather had spent 30 years protecting. My name is Amanda Brooks, and this is the story of how my grandfather's final secret destroyed the family everyone else believed was perfect. The morning of my grandfather's funeral arrived beneath a low Montana sky the color of cold steel. The clouds hung so close to the mountains that they seemed ready to collapse onto the pine-covered hills surrounding the Brooks family ranch. The air smelled of damp earth cedar, and the faint smoke from fireplaces scattered across neighboring properties. It was the same smell I remembered from childhood visits before life carried me into the army and thousands of miles away. I stood beside my rental SUV in my Army service uniform, adjusting the sleeves one last time before walking toward the white wooden church. Even after 17 years in uniform, funerals never became easier. Military funerals? Civilian funerals? It didn't matter. Loss always sounded the same. The slow murmur of voices, the scrape of polished shoes across old wooden floors, the silence between people who had already run out of things to say. Grandpa William Brooks had lived to 87. Most people called that a full life. To me, it still wasn't enough. He had been the only person who never asked me why I joined the Army. The only one who attended my commissioning ceremony. The only one who wrote every single month even after arthritis twisted his fingers until writing became painful. He never missed my birthday. Never forgot a promotion. Never forgot who I was. I walked into the church and every conversation seemed to hesitate for half a second. Not because I wore the uniform. Because I was me. Amanda. The daughter who had supposedly disappointed everyone. My mother spotted me first. "There you are," she whispered, kissing my cheek without warmth. "Try not to make today about yourself." I blinked once. I wasn't planning to. I know what you mean." She looked relieved that I hadn't argued. She always preferred silence. Silence was easier to control. My father shook hands with guests near the front pews. His black suit fit perfectly, his expression carefully arranged into something that resembled grief. Every few moments he accepted another embrace, another whispered apology, another compliment about what an extraordinary man his father had been. Then his eyes landed on me. "You finally made it. I drove through the night. You could have worn something else." I looked down at my uniform. "This is my formal dress. This isn't a military event." "No." He adjusted his tie. "It draws attention." I smiled politely. "So does pretending to mourn while checking your watch every 5 minutes. His jaw tightened. Before he could answer, my older brother Kevin walked over carrying a paper cup of coffee. "Amanda." Kevin smiled the way successful salesmen smiled before overcharging customers. "You look..." He glanced at my uniform. "Official." "You look rested." "I slept great." "I can tell." He laughed as though we'd shared a joke. Kevin always laughed before saying something cruel. "I guess Grandpa would have liked seeing you here." "He loved seeing all of us." Kevin shrugged. I was the one who actually stayed. There it was. The family narrative. Kevin stayed. Amanda left. Never mind that I left to serve. Never mind that Grandpa had encouraged me to go. Facts rarely survived inside our family. The service began. Pastor Reynolds spoke about kindness, sacrifice, generosity. I listened, but every sentence reminded me of conversations I'd had with Grandpa on the porch of his cabin overlooking Flathead Lake. He used to say that character revealed itself most clearly after funerals. When everyone's crying, he'd told me once, "Watch who starts counting." At the time, I thought he meant money in a general sense. Standing inside that church, I finally understood. The closing hymn hadn't even finished before I noticed Kevin checking his phone. My father quietly whispered something to my mother. She nodded. Then she looked toward Attorney Charles Whitmore sitting 3 pews behind us. Not with sadness, with expectation. Outside the cemetery rested beneath towering evergreens. The wind carried the scent of fresh-cut grass and distant rain. As soldiers folded the American flag that had covered Grandpa's coffin, a tribute to his service decades earlier, I felt my throat tighten. The bugle echoed across the valley. For one impossible second, I was 12 years old again, sitting beside Grandpa on the dock while he taught me how to skip stones across still water. "You don't force it," he'd said. "You let it glide." The final salute ended. People drifted toward waiting cars. Condolences slowly gave way to conversations about flights, hotels, dinner reservations. Life moved forward. It always did. Just as I reached my vehicle, someone called my name. Amanda. Charles Whitmore. Grandpa's attorney. He was nearly 70 himself now, carrying a weathered leather briefcase that looked almost as old as he was. "Could we speak privately?" We stepped behind a row of pine trees overlooking the cemetery. Without saying a word, he handed me a thick ivory envelope. My name appeared across the front in Grandpa's unmistakable handwriting. Amanda Brooks. Only Amanda. My chest tightened. "Your grandfather instructed me to give this to you after the burial," Charles said quietly. "Not before." He was very specific. My fingers trembled slightly as I opened the envelope. Inside rested a handwritten letter. "Amanda, if you're reading this, then I've finally run out of time. First, know this. I loved you exactly as you are. Never doubt that. Second, everything changes today." Charles cleared his throat. "There's something else." He handed me another document. I looked down, then looked again. $40 million. I stared at the number until it stopped looking like English. There has to be some mistake. "There isn't. He left it entirely to you." My heartbeat became strangely loud. "Does my family know?" "No." "Will they?" "Only if you tell them." I looked back at Grandpa's letter. At the bottom, another instruction waited. "Tell no one. In exactly 3 days, go to my cabin. Unlock the old steel box beneath the workbench. Only then will you understand why." I folded the letter carefully. "What happens if I tell them now?" Charles met my eyes. "I strongly advise that you don't." That was all he said. No explanation. No warning. Just those words. I slipped everything back into the envelope. When I returned to the parking lot, my parents were waiting beside my SUV. My mother noticed the envelope immediately. "What did Charles want?" "Oh." I tucked it under my arm casually. "Just some paperwork." "What kind of paperwork?" Kevin asked. "Administrative." Dad stepped closer. "Did your grandfather leave you something?" For one brief second, $40 million echoed inside my head. Then I remembered Grandpa's handwriting. "Tell no one." I smiled. "Nothing important." The three of them exchanged almost invisible glances, so quick that most people would have missed them. I didn't. Dad forced a laugh. "Well, your grandfather always did enjoy keeping old records." "I suppose he did." Mother linked her arm through Dad's. "We're all meeting at the ranch tonight. I'll be there." As they walked away, I watched them whisper to each other before getting into Kevin's truck. Something about those whispers unsettled me. Not because I thought they knew about the inheritance, because they looked disappointed, as though they'd expected a different answer. I stood alone in the parking lot while distant thunder rolled across the mountains. The envelope suddenly felt much heavier than paper should. I had no idea that my grandfather hadn't left me $40 million because he trusted me. He'd left it because he knew exactly what was about to happen next. And somehow, he'd already planned for it. I barely slept that night. The guest room at the ranch had always been my favorite when I was a little girl. Grandpa had built the bed himself from knotty pine, and every summer the room smelled of fresh-cut lumber cedar soap, and the lavender sachets Grandma used to tuck into the dresser drawers. Now it smelled like dust. Like memories that had been locked away for too long. At 3:30 in the morning, I gave up trying to sleep. Rain tapped softly against the window while the old grandfather clock downstairs marked each passing minute. Every sound felt louder inside that enormous house. I reached into my duffel bag and pulled out Grandpa's letter again. I must have read it 20 times. Every sentence seemed ordinary until I reached the last instruction. "Tell no one. 3 days. The steel box." Grandpa never wasted words. If he had written those instructions, there had to be a reason. The following morning, the ranch felt strangely different. Not because Grandpa was gone. Because everyone else seemed busy. Too busy. My father spent nearly an hour on the phone inside his office with the door closed. Kevin disappeared twice before breakfast. My mother repeatedly asked whether Attorney Whitmore had contacted me again. "No," I answered calmly. "You'd tell us if he did, wouldn't you?" she asked. "Why wouldn't I?" She forced a smile. "No reason." But there was a reason. I could see it in her eyes. She wasn't grieving. She was waiting. Over the next 2 days, I noticed things I never would have questioned before. Kevin searched Grandpa's study while claiming he was looking for family photos. Dad unlocked filing cabinets that had remained untouched for years. Mom repeatedly asked the housekeeper whether she'd seen any documents lying around Grandpa's bedroom. Every conversation stopped when I entered the room. Every hallway became quiet. It reminded me of my first deployment. You learn very quickly when people are hiding something. Their words don't give them away. Their silence does. On the third morning, I left before sunrise. I told no one where I was going. Grandpa's cabin sat nearly 30 minutes from the ranch beside a small lake surrounded by towering lodgepole pines. Frost still clung to the grass as I unlocked the weathered front door. The familiar scent rushed toward me immediately. Old books, coffee, firewood, machine oil. It felt as though Grandpa had simply stepped outside and would return any minute carrying his fishing pole. Instead, only silence greeted me. The workshop remained exactly as I remembered. Every wrench hung in perfect order. Every drawer carried handwritten labels. His workbench stood beneath the only window where the early morning sunlight spilled across decades of careful craftsmanship. I knelt. There it was. A heavy steel lockbox bolted beneath the bench. Exactly where Grandpa had said it would be. The small brass key inside my envelope slid smoothly into the lock. Click! The sound echoed through the workshop. For several seconds I simply stared. Then I lifted the lid. It wasn't filled with money. Not jewelry. Not deeds. Files. Dozens of carefully organized folders, each labeled by year. Photographs. Cassette tapes. USB drives. Bank statements. Legal documents. And one sealed envelope resting on top. My hand suddenly felt cold. Across the front, Grandpa had written only 6 words. Read this before anything else. I opened it. Amanda, if you are reading this, then you trusted me enough to wait 3 days. Thank you. Now I must ask something much harder. I need you to question everything you believe about your parents. I stopped reading. My heartbeat grew louder. No, that couldn't be what he meant. I continued. For 30 years I protected you the only way I knew how. Not by telling you the truth, but by making sure the truth survived me. Inside these files is proof. Every word can be verified. Nothing has been exaggerated. Nothing has been invented. When you're finished reading, you will understand why I could never tell you while I was alive. My vision blurred. I took a slow breath before opening the first folder. It was dated 31 years earlier. The year I was born. Hospital records. Letters. Insurance forms. Then I found a handwritten note. Not Grandpa's handwriting. My mother's. My stomach tightened before I'd even begun reading. We already have Kevin. 1 child is enough. Perhaps William knows someone willing to adopt the baby. I stopped breathing. I read the sentence again. Then again. Adopt the baby. The baby. Me. The room suddenly felt much smaller. Grandpa had attached another page beneath it. His own handwritten note. I refused. Amanda stays. No granddaughter of mine will ever believe she wasn't wanted. I closed my eyes. 1,000 childhood memories crashed together at once. Every birthday that felt smaller than Kevin's. Every Christmas when his gifts covered half the living room. Every school award my parents somehow forgot to attend. Every promotion they'd dismissed with a simple, "That's nice." I'd spent years believing none of it mattered. That maybe they simply connected with Kevin more naturally. Now another possibility stood before me. What if none of it had been accidental? I opened the next folder. Bank statements. Trust documents. Canceled checks. Grandpa had established an education trust in my name before I turned 5. Large deposits appeared every year. Then, withdrawals. Authorized by my father. My pulse quickened. The trust that should have paid for college had almost been emptied before I graduated high school. I remembered Mom telling me there hadn't been enough money. That Kevin needed help with his business. That I'd understand someday. I understood now. Another folder. Letters between Grandpa and a law firm. Another. Property records. Another. Private investigator reports. Then photographs. One showed my parents leaving a bank carrying thick folders. Grandpa had written beneath it, "The day they tried to move your trust without permission." I leaned back against the workbench. The wood felt cold through my uniform jacket. Every explanation I'd accepted throughout my life began falling apart. The used car I never received. The scholarship that mysteriously disappeared. The savings bonds Grandma supposedly forgot to buy. Each disappointment had arrived with a believable excuse. One excuse after another. One lie after another. By noon I had barely finished half the box. My head pounded. Nothing inside accused my parents emotionally. Everything relied on documents, receipts, letters, signatures, evidence. Grandpa hadn't wanted revenge. He'd wanted proof. Near the bottom of the box I discovered one final envelope marked, "Only after reading everything above." Inside rested a business card. Charles Whitmore. On the back, Grandpa had written one sentence. "Ask Charles for the recording." Almost immediately my phone vibrated. The screen displayed the exact name I'd just read. "Charles Whitmore," I answered quietly. "This is Amanda." His voice sounded unusually gentle. "I hoped you'd reached the cabin." "I have. I suppose you've started reading." "I don't know what to believe anymore." "I expected you'd say that." Silence lingered between us. Finally he spoke again. "Your grandfather left one final piece of evidence." "What is it?" "A video." I looked around the empty workshop. "What kind of video?" "The kind he wanted you to watch only after you discovered the documents." My fingers tightened around the phone. "Why?" Charles exhaled softly. "Because once you watch it, there will be no going back." Charles Whitmore's office sat on the second floor of an old brick building in downtown Kalispell, above a pharmacy that still had a hand-painted sign in the window. By the time I arrived, the rain had stopped, but the streets were slick and shining beneath a pale afternoon sky. I parked across the street and sat behind the wheel for a moment, both hands resting on the steering wheel, watching people move through ordinary lives. A woman carried groceries. A man laughed into his phone. An elderly couple crossed carefully at the corner, holding hands like they had done it for 50 years. I remember thinking how strange it was that the world could keep moving when yours had just split open. Inside, Charles was waiting with the door already open. He didn't greet me with polite conversation. He simply stepped aside and let me in. On his desk sat a laptop, a sealed evidence envelope, and an old black flash drive. My stomach tightened. "Before you watch this," he said, "I need you to understand something. Your grandfather made me promise that I would not interfere unless you chose to continue." I looked at the flash drive. "Continue with what?" "With the truth." That should have sounded dramatic. It didn't. It sounded like a legal warning. I sat down slowly. Charles inserted the flash drive, clicked a folder, and turned the laptop toward me. The video opened on Grandpa sitting in his cabin. He wore his old brown cardigan, the one with worn elbows and a missing button near the collar. Behind him I could see the same workbench where I had opened the steel box that morning. For a second the pain of seeing him alive again almost knocked the air out of me. Then he began to speak. "Amanda?" He said, his voice thinner than I remembered, but still steady. "If you're watching this, then you found the files. I'm sorry, sweetheart. I know what they must have done to you." My throat tightened. Grandpa looked down at something in his hands. "I spent years telling myself I was protecting you by keeping quiet. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I should have told you sooner. But your parents always had a way of turning truth into poison. If I accused them while I was alive, they would have called me senile. They would have called you greedy. They would have dragged you through court until you had nothing left but exhaustion." He paused and took a breath. "So I waited, and I built something they couldn't talk their way out of." Charles stood near the window silent. Grandpa continued. "The $40 million is yours. It comes from the sale of Brooks Timber Shares investment accounts and property your grandmother insisted should one day belong to you. But listen carefully. The money was not transferred immediately after my death. It was placed under a 72-hour protection clause." I leaned forward. "Oh, what?" I whispered. Charles didn't answer. He didn't need to. Grandpa explained. "If you told your parents before those 72 hours passed, they would have pressured you, maybe threatened you, maybe convinced you to sign something. So I made sure nothing became accessible until after the third day. If you waited, the inheritance locked into your name alone. No contest, no family override, no emergency petition, nothing." My skin prickled. That was why Charles warned me. That was why Grandpa wrote, "Tell no one." He hadn't just left me money. He had left me time. By now, Grandpa said your father has probably started searching my files. Your mother will pretend she is worried about family unity. Kevin will act offended if anyone suggests he wants money. Do not believe the performance. A humorless laugh escaped my chest. He knew them perfectly. Grandpa's expression changed then, softer, sadder. "There is more, Amanda. 3 months before I died, your father came to this cabin. He didn't know I had cameras installed after the first break-in. He and Kevin searched the workshop for my estate papers. Your mother waited in the truck. I heard them talking. The screen cut to another recording. Grainy security footage appeared. The date stamp showed a night in March. Dad entered the cabin with a flashlight. Kevin followed behind him. My father's voice was low but clear. He had to put it somewhere. Kevin opened drawers. What if he really left something to Amanda? Dad laughed. To Amanda, she wears a uniform and thinks that makes her noble. She wouldn't know what to do with real money. Kevin said Mom thinks Grandpa changed the trust. He better not have. What if he did? Dad turned toward him. Then we fix it before she finds out. My body went still. Not angry. Not yet. Anger requires room. I had none. I was too busy absorbing the shape of their betrayal. The video continued. Kevin muttered she always was his favorite. My father answered she was his mistake. I felt those words land somewhere deep and quiet. Not like a wound. Like confirmation. Grandpa's face returned to the screen. I am sorry you had to hear that, he said. But you needed to know what they are capable of when they think no one is watching. I wiped one tear from my cheek before it reached my jaw. I hated that I had cried. Then I hated myself for hating it. Grandpa leaned closer to the camera. There is a family meeting scheduled with Charles 4 days after my funeral. They believe the will reading will give them control. Let them believe it. Charles has instructions. Every false move they make between my death and that meeting will be documented. Charles finally spoke beside me. It has been. I looked up. What did they do? He picked up a folder from his desk and placed it in front of me. Your father contacted the bank yesterday claiming he had authority over your grandfather's accounts. He did not. I opened the folder. Kevin attempted to access 2 business accounts this morning. My fingers turned the pages. Your mother called my office 3 times asking whether you had received private documents. I looked at him. And you recorded all of this? Every call to my office is logged. Every request was denied in writing. Every attempt is now part of the estate record. For the first time since opening the steel box, my breathing steadied. Not because I felt safe, because I understood the battlefield. My parents had thought grief would make everyone careless. Grandpa had counted on greed making them careless first. I drove back to the ranch just before dinner. The house glowed warmly from the outside, every window yellow against the darkening sky. It looked like the kind of home people envied from the road. Big porch, stone chimney, American flag near the front steps. Inside it smelled of roast beef and expensive wine. My mother stood in the dining room arranging silverware no one needed. There you are, she said. Where have you been all day? Driving. To where? Clearing my head. Kevin sat at the table with a glass of bourbon. Must be a lot to clear. I removed my jacket and hung it over the chair. More than I expected. Dad studied me from the head of the table. You talked to Charles. It wasn't a question. I looked at him calmly. Why would you say that? His mouth tightened. Because he's been avoiding my calls. Maybe he's busy. With what? I sat down. Dad, I wouldn't know. For a moment nobody moved. Then my mother placed a bowl of potatoes on the table too hard. We need this family to stay united right now, she said. I looked at her hands. Her wedding ring flashed beneath the chandelier. United families don't usually need to keep saying that. Kevin gave a short laugh. There's the soldier again. No, I said quietly, just the daughter. That silenced him. Dinner passed with knives scraping plates and conversations that never became conversations. Dad asked about my unit. Mother asked when I had to leave. Kevin mentioned that the ranch would need serious leadership now that Grandpa was gone. I said very little. Silence had protected me once. It would protect me again. After dinner, Dad followed me into the hallway. Amanda. I turned. His face had softened into the version he used when he wanted something. Your grandfather was old. Toward the end, he wasn't always thinking clearly. I held his gaze. He seemed clear to me. Dad stepped closer. If he gave you anything private, you need to bring it to me. Not because I want control, but because I know how these things work. I almost smiled. There it was. The first hand reaching for the door. What things? Estate matters, money, property, legal traps. Legal traps. He blinked, realizing too late what he'd said. I nodded once. Good night, Dad. As I walked upstairs, my phone buzzed. A message from Charles. Family meeting confirmed for tomorrow at 10 a.m. Do not sign anything, bring the envelope. I locked my bedroom door and sat on the edge of the bed. For 30 years they had counted on me not knowing. Tomorrow they would walk into that office believing they were still ahead. and for the first time in my life I was going to let them talk until they buried themselves. The next morning I arrived at Charles Whitmore's office 15 minutes early. That was an old Army habit. If you were on time, you were late. If you were early, you had room to think. The sky outside had cleared overnight, leaving the mountains sharp and blue in the distance. Sunlight struck the wet pavement and made the whole street look freshly washed, as though the town itself had decided to pretend nothing ugly had happened beneath its quiet roofs. I wore my uniform again. Not for intimidation. Not for drama. For balance. When your entire childhood has been rewritten in 48 hours, you reach for the things that are still true. The uniform was true. My service was true. The nameplate on my chest was true. Brooks. For most of my life, that name had felt like something I had to earn. That morning it felt like something I had survived. Charles met me in the hallway before I reached the conference room. "They're already inside," he said. "Of course they are." He glanced at the envelope beneath my arm. "You brought it." "I brought everything you asked for." His expression softened. "Your grandfather would be proud of how you're handling this." I looked toward the closed conference room door. "I haven't handled it yet." "No," Charles said quietly. "But you haven't let them handle you either." That stayed with me. He opened the door. My parents sat on one side of the long mahogany table. Kevin sat beside them, leaning back in his chair with the easy confidence of a man who believed the room already belonged to him. Dad wore his dark blue suit, the one he reserved for bankers and funerals. Mom had dressed carefully in pearls, a cream blouse, and grief that looked expensive but not quite real. Kevin looked me over and smirked. "Uniform again?" I took the seat across from him. "Meeting again." His smile faded. Dad cleared his throat. "Let's get started. We've waited long enough." Charles closed the door and placed a recorder in the center of the table. "For accuracy," he said. Mother frowned. "Is that necessary?" "Yes." One word. Flat. Final. It was the first time I'd seen her hesitate. Charles opened a leather folder. "Before we proceed with Mr. Brooks's estate documents, I need everyone present to confirm that no one has removed, transferred, hidden, or attempted to access any estate property since Mr. William Brooks's death." Kevin laughed under his breath. "What kind of question is that?" "A required one." Dad waved a hand. "No, of course not." Mother nodded quickly. "No." Kevin shrugged. "No." Charles looked at each of them. Then he looked at me. "Amanda." "No," I said, "I have not." Charles made a note. The sound of his pen scratching across paper seemed louder than it should have been. Dad leaned forward. "Charles, with all due respect, my father's estate is a family matter. We don't need theatrics." "I agree," Charles said. "We need facts." Kevin folded his arms. "Then read the will." Charles adjusted his glasses. "Very well." He began with the ordinary provisions. Charitable gifts, old vehicles, personal items, a watch left to Kevin, jewelry left to my mother, a fishing rifle left to my father. Small things, sentimental things. My family listened impatiently. They were waiting for the big pieces. The ranch, the timber shares, the accounts, the investment portfolio. Charles turned a page. The remaining assets of the estate, including Brooks Timber Holdings, liquid accounts, real property not otherwise assigned, and all investment proceeds from the Brooks Family Preservation Trust. Kevin sat straighter. Dad's fingers rested on the table. Mother stopped breathing for half a second. Charles continued. "Are to be transferred according to the protection clause executed by William H. Brooks 6 months prior to his death." Dad's face tightened. "What protection clause?" Charles removed another document. Mr. Brooks established a conditional estate shield. Under its terms, any beneficiary who attempted unauthorized access to estate property exerted pressure upon Amanda. Brooks concealed relevant documents or misrepresented legal authority would be disqualified from receiving expanded estate benefits. The room went still. Kevin blinked. "Wait, what does that mean?" "It means Charles said your grandfather anticipated misconduct." Dad's chair scraped back an inch. "That is insulting." Charles didn't blink. "It is documented." Mother's voice trembled, but not with sadness. William was confused near the end. "No," Charles said. "He was examined by 2 physicians and found fully competent. Those reports are included." Dad turned red. "This is absurd. I'm his son. And Amanda is his granddaughter." Kevin pointed at me. "She wasn't even here. She ran off and played soldier while we took care of everything." I looked at him. "You searched his cabin in March." His mouth opened, then closed. Dad slowly turned toward me. "What did you say?" Charles opened a laptop and clicked once. The conference room screen mounted on the wall came alive. Security footage appeared. Grainy. Dark. Clear enough. Dad walking through Grandpa's cabin. Kevin opening drawers. Their voices filling the room. What if he really left something to Amanda? She wears a uniform and thinks that makes her noble. She wouldn't know what to do with real money. Mom's face went pale. Kevin whispered, "Turn that off." Charles did not. The next line came. "Then we fix it before she finds out." No one moved. The footage ended. Charles folded his hands. That was unauthorized entry into estate property. Dad slammed his palm on the table. "That cabin belonged to my father. And now it belongs to the trust," Charles said. "At the time of that recording, you had no legal authority to enter for the purpose of locating estate documents." Kevin stood. "This is a setup." "No," I said quietly. He looked at me. "This is what you sound like when nobody is praising you." That hit him harder than I expected. For once, Kevin had no clever answer. Charles opened another folder. Yesterday, Mr. Robert Brooks contacted First Mountain Bank, claiming authority to review William Brooks's accounts. Request denied. Dad stared at the folder. "This is private banking information. It became estate evidence when you invoked authority you did not possess." Charles turned another page. Kevin Brooks attempted online access to 2 business accounts at 8:13 yesterday morning, and again at 8:47. Both attempts were flagged. Kevin's face flushed. "I had the passwords from Grandpa." "Passwords do not create legal authority." Mother gripped her purse with both hands. "This family is grieving." I finally looked at her. "No, Mom, this family is calculating." Her eyes filled immediately. "That used to work on me. It used to turn my spine soft and my voice apologetic. Not anymore." Charles reached the final folder. "There is one more matter." Dad's voice dropped. "Charles." The warning in his tone was unmistakable. Charles ignored it. "William Brooks also preserved records concerning Amanda's education trust established when she was a child. These records indicate multiple unauthorized withdrawals and transfers between 1994 and 2009. The room changed. Not visibly. But something shifted beneath us. Dad stopped pretending to be offended. Kevin stopped pretending to understand. Mother looked at the table. Charles slid copies across the surface. Signatures, bank receipts, internal letters, correspondence from William objecting to the transfers. Attempts to restore the funds privately. I picked up one page. There was Dad's signature. There was Mom's. There was the amount. Money that had been meant for my education. My future. My independence. Dad's jaw worked. That was family money. No, Charles said. It was Amanda's trust. Mother whispered, "We needed it." I looked at her. "For Kevin." Her silence answered. Kevin stared at me with naked resentment. "You always act like you're better than us." "No," I said. "I just stopped believing I was less." Charles removed one final document. Under the protection clause, Robert Brooks, Elaine Brooks, and Kevin Brooks are disqualified from receiving additional estate distributions beyond the personal items already listed. The remaining estate transfers exclusively to Amanda Brooks as executed 72 hours after Mr. Brooks's burial. Mother's hand flew to her mouth. Dad stood. "You cannot do this." "I didn't," Charles said. "Your father did." Kevin turned on me. "You knew." I met his eyes. I waited. Dad's face twisted. "You let us walk in here?" "Yes." The word was calm, honest, heavy. He stepped toward me, then stopped when Charles stood as well. For a moment I saw my father clearly, not as the tall man who had frightened me as a girl, not as the voice I had spent years trying to impress, just a man who had mistaken control for love and inheritance for justice. I stood slowly. My chair made almost no sound. "For 30 years I said you let me believe I was unwanted because it was convenient. You let Kevin believe he was entitled because it served you. And you let Grandpa carry the truth alone because you thought he would die before anyone could prove it." Mother began to cry. "Amanda, please." I looked at her, and for the first time her tears did not pull me closer. They only showed me how long I had been trained to comfort the people who hurt me. I gathered Grandpa's envelope from the table. "You don't get to use family as a hiding place anymore." Then I turned toward Charles. "What happens now?" He closed the folder. "Now we file." Dad's voice cracked behind me. "Amanda." I paused at the door. For one foolish second, some old part of me wanted him to apologize. Not explain. Not negotiate. Just say he was sorry. He didn't. Instead, he said, "You'll regret this." I looked back at the three of them. My father furious, my mother crying, my brother stunned, and I understood something with absolute clarity. I had spent my whole life waiting for them to choose me. Grandpa had spent his final years making sure I could finally choose myself. No, I said. This is the first decision of my life that belongs completely to me. Then I walked out before they could take another piece of it. 3 months passed before I returned to the ranch. By then, autumn had painted the Montana hills in deep shades of gold and crimson. The aspens shimmered in the afternoon breeze, and the air carried the familiar scent of pine needles, damp earth, and wood smoke. From a distance, everything looked exactly as it had when I was a little girl. Only now did I understand that appearances could preserve memories just as easily as they concealed the truth. The legal proceedings had unfolded exactly as Charles predicted. My grandfather's estate had been settled without a successful challenge. Every attempt my parents made to contest the protection clause failed. The judge ruled that William Brooks had acted deliberately with full mental capacity and that every safeguard had been properly documented. The evidence spoke louder than anyone's excuses ever could. My father never apologized. Instead, he blamed the lawyers. He blamed the recordings. He blamed my grandfather. Most of all, he blamed me. Kevin gave 2 interviews to local business publications, portraying himself as the victim of an unfair inheritance. Neither article mentioned the unauthorized account access or the education trust. Facts that don't serve pride rarely make headlines. As for my mother, she wrote me 3 letters. The first asked me to remember we are family. The second said she hoped time would heal misunderstandings. The third contained only 1 sentence. I wish things had been different. I believed she meant it. I simply wasn't sure which things she wished had been different. That they had treated me differently. Or that they had been caught. One quiet Saturday morning, Charles called. I have something your grandfather wanted you to receive after everything was finished. When I arrived at his office, he handed me a small cedar box no larger than a jewelry case. There were no legal instructions attached, he said. Only personal ones. Inside rested Grandpa's old pocket watch. The silver had dulled with age, but it still ticked steadily. Beneath it lay one final handwritten note. Amanda, if you're reading this, then the fighting is over. I hope you understand now that I never wanted you to inherit my money. I wanted you to inherit your freedom. Money can disappear. Land can be sold. Companies rise and fall. But once someone learns the truth about who they are, no one can take that away. Don't waste your life proving your worth to people who already decided they wouldn't see it. Spend it building a life where you never have to ask for permission to be enough. Love. Grandpa, I read those words 3 times, not because they were difficult to understand. Because they finally answered the question I had carried since childhood. Why had he waited? He hadn't been protecting an inheritance. He had been protecting me from becoming trapped inside another lie. The $40 million remained in my investment account for several months while I figured out what to do with it. I wasn't interested in buying a mansion, or expensive cars, or proving anything. During my deployments, I'd met military families who struggled to pay rent after losing a spouse in service. I'd met children who postponed college because one parent never came home. Those faces stayed with me. So I established the William Brooks Military Family Foundation. Its first scholarship helped the daughter of a fallen Army medic attend nursing school. The second paid for adaptive housing renovations for a wounded Marine. The third funded counseling programs for military children coping with grief. Every approval letter carried a simple sentence at the bottom. In honor of William Brooks, who believed every child deserves to know they are wanted. Charles smiled the first time he read it. He'd have liked that. No, I answered. He would have corrected the grammar. Charles laughed so hard he nearly spilled his coffee. For the first time since Grandpa's funeral, I laughed too. A month later, my unit received new deployment orders. Standing once again among soldiers preparing for another mission, I realized something unexpected. Nothing inside me felt unfinished anymore. The anger had faded. Not because my parents deserved forgiveness. Because I no longer needed them to explain the past before I could build my future. One crisp October afternoon before leaving Montana, I drove alone to Grandpa's grave. The cemetery overlooked the valley exactly as it had on the day we buried him. The wind carried dry leaves across the grass. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk circled lazily beneath an endless blue sky. I placed his old pocket watch against the granite headstone for a moment, before slipping it back into my jacket pocket. I finally understand, I said aloud. I spent years trying to become the daughter they wanted. A breeze rustled through the pine trees. I should have been learning to become the woman you already knew I was. Silence answered. Not an empty silence. A peaceful one. The kind Grandpa always loved. As I turned to leave, I looked back one last time. His name had been carved into stone. His love had been carved into me. One would weather with time. The other never would. Driving away from the cemetery, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. For years I had seen the little girl who wondered why she wasn't enough. That girl was gone. Looking back at me was a woman who finally understood that the people who failed to love her had never defined her value. They had only revealed their own. Sometimes people ask whether I regret keeping my grandfather's secret. My answer is always the same. No, because silence gave the truth enough time to survive. And the truth gave me a life that no amount of money could ever buy. If this story reminded you that your worth should never depend on someone else's approval, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment and tell me where you're watching from. Stories like this remind us that family is defined by love, not by blood alone. If you'd like to hear more journeys of resilience, justice, and hope, consider subscribing so you won't miss the next story. Until next time, take care of yourselves and the people who truly stand beside you.